Barack Obama asked Donald Trump a question. Let us see what Donald Trump did next. Barack Obama received a prize. He did not even know why he got it. They gave it to Barack Obama for doing absolutely nothing but destroying our country. Now, Donald Trump was a lot. Donald Trump was not a president. Stop there. Before we go else. Before we get to what happened in that room. Before we get to the moment the cameras caught something that Donald Trump did not intend for the cameras to catch. You need to understand one thing. What you are about to see is not the debate. It is not a shouting match. It is not the kind of confrontation that generates heat and noise and gets forgotten by the next morning. What you are about to see is a trap, a quiet one, built not from accusations or documents or dramatic revelations, but from a clean, impossible-to-dodge question. The reason it worked, the reason it stayed with everyone who watched it, is not because of what Barack Obama said, it is because of what Donald Trump did when he heard it. There are moments in politics when a room changes before anyone raises their voice. You can feel it before you can name it. The cameras keep flashing. The reporters keep typing. The lights stay where they were. Yet something has shifted. The temperature changes. The attention sharpens. The particular electricity of a moment that everyone in the room understands is different from the moments around it moves through the air like a current. That was the atmosphere. That was what the people in that room felt before a single word of the exchange had been spoken. When Donald Trump tried to dismiss another question with his usual confidence, and Barack Obama stepped into the conversation. Not loudly, not aggressively, not with the leaning interrupt first energy of a man who needs to establish dominance before the other person has finished their sentence. With calm. The specific loaded pressure-building calm of a man who knows what he is about to do and is in no hurry to do it before the moment is exactly right. Donald Trump wanted the room focused on his version of events, his narrative, his framing. The story where every question is politically motivated, every critic is corrupt, every piece of scrutiny is persecution dressed up as journalism. The story where he is always the target and never the subject, the victim and never the one with questions to answer. Barack Obama wanted the room focused on something entirely, something harder to spin, something that does not perform under pressure. Transparency. Here is where you need to lean in. Because the original pressure point, the thing that started this exchange, was not a secret. It was not an accusation or a leaked document or the kind of dramatic revelation that politicians know how to manage because they have practiced the response. It was a question, a simpler question. The question that follows Donald Trump through every press conference, every interview, every moment when the cameras re-on and the room is watching. Why does a man who demands trust from the country resist the most basic forms of direct accountability? Think about that. Not as an attack, as an observation about the relationship between a public figure and the people he asks to follow him. You want trust. You demand loyalty. You ask people to believe every claim, every boast, every carefully staged image released at the advantageous moment. But the moment anyone asks you to prove consistency, to demonstrate that the private man matches the performance, suddenly the question becomes persecution. Suddenly transparency is an attack. Suddenly accountability is a witch hunt. Donald Trump has used every shield, family, success, wealth, loyalty to supporters' victimhood when cornered. He has used all of them expertly, repeatedly, in the moments when criticism gets close enough to require a response. Shields only work until someone asks a question simple enough that everyone in the room can understand it. Simple enough that the sophistication of the deflection becomes visible against the simplicity of what was asked. Barack Obama knew that. He did not need drama. He did not need a folder or a file or a secret revelation or a piece of information that no one had seen before. He needed one challenge placed at the right moment, delivered with the right tone, and then left to do its work. Donald Trump began the way he always begins when cornered by a question he does not want to answer. He called the story fake. He attacked the motives behind the question. He suggested the entire conversation was another organized attempt to keep his critics relevant by manufacturing a controversy that would not exist without their willingness to repeat it. The rhythm is familiar now, almost predictable. Step 1, deny the question's legitimacy. Step 2, attack the person asking it. Step 3, accuse the media of creating the problem by choosing to notice it. Step 4, repeat faster, louder until the original question gets buried under the noise. The reason is because I have a lot of faith in the American people, and I think they recognize that being president is a serious job. It is not hosting a talk show or a reality show. That line, delivered quietly, without drama, without much as a raised eyebrow. It is not hosting a talk show or a reality show. No names, no accusation, no finger pointed, just a standard stated in the presence of someone who had clearly been applying a different one. Barack Obama did not chase every insult. He did not follow Donald Trump into the noise. He did not meet the speed and volume of the deflection with matching speed and volume. He waited. That waiting, that patient, deliberate, completely controlled waiting became its own form of pressure, the kind of pressure that silence creates, the kind that volume cannot cover, because the silence keeps returning the moment the volume pauses. Stay with this, because this is where the moment turned. Barack Obama framed the issue as a test of leadership, not an attack, a test, a specific applicable fair standard that would apply to any public figure in the same position. Simple logic. If a public figure builds an image around strength, honesty, and family values, if those are the pillars of the persona presented to the public, then he should not panic when asked to demonstrate consistency. If he uses his family as proof of his character when the cameras are friendly and the crowd is warm, he cannot suddenly declare every family-related question forbidden the moment the scrutiny gets sharper. If he presents his business record as evidence of his intelligence and competence, he cannot treat questions about that record as persecution. If he asks the country to trust his judgment, he cannot respond to requests for evidence of that judgment as if the request itself is the crime. That was the point Barack Obama drove home. Not gossip, not personal cruelty, not the politics of destruction that Donald Trump always accuses his opponents of practicing. Accountability, the simple, basic, democracy-sustaining idea that public power comes attached to responsibility, not as a punishment, as a condition. The condition that every person who has ever held power in a functioning democracy has understood and accepted, even when accepting it was uncomfortable. The room felt the difference immediately. You could see it in the reporters, in the way attention shifted, in the way the quality of the listening changed, from the monitoring of a press conference to the focused, leaning forward attention of people who understand that something real is happening. Donald Trump wanted the exchange to sound like persecution. Barack Obama made it sound like a standard. The standard was not complicated. It was not invented for this moment. It was not a trap or a rhetorical trick. It was the standard that every president before Donald Trump had understood, accepted, and submitted to. Not perfectly, not without resistance in moments, but fundamentally as the basic operating principle of what it means to hold power in a democracy. Public power comes with responsibility. A president cannot demand that the country believe every claim, every boast, every carefully staged image, while refusing to answer questions about honesty, judgment, and the example being set for everyone watching, including the youngest people watching, including the children learning what leadership looks like by watching the people who hold it. That is why Donald Trump's confidence started to look less steady, not because it collapsed dramatically, not because he broke or stumbled or visibly lost control. Because it started to look like work, like something being maintained rather than something natural, like the performance of ease rather than ease itself. The witch hunt that you should be talking about is they caught President Barack Obama absolutely cold. Tulsi Gabbard, what they did to this country in 2016, starting in 2016, but going up all the way to 2020 and the election. Notice what happened there. The question was about transparency, about accountability, about the standard a public figure accepts when he asks for trust. The answer went somewhere else entirely immediately without passing through the question at all, straight to 2016, to investigations, to Tulsi Gabbard, to a completely different subject populated with completely different accusations. The question asked, why do you resist accountability? The answer said, have you considered that other people are worse? That redirection, that reflexive practice redirection is itself an answer, just not the one that was asked for. It was not because Barack Obama had shouted him down. He had not shouted all. It was because Barack Obama had refused to enter the shouting match, had refused to follow Donald Trump into the noise, had stayed calmly and immovably in the place where the original question was still waiting for an answer. Donald Trump's words came fast phrases, lies, enemies, witch hunts, unfair treatment, fake stories, political persecution, the deep state, the media, the judges, the prosecutors, the entire machinery of opposition that exists in Donald Trump's telling, for the sole purpose of preventing the recognition of his greatness, all of it delivered at speed. With the energy of a man who has learned that speed can substitute for substance if the audience does not have time to slow down and check. Barack Obama's response moved slower, deliberately slower, and somehow in the strange way that calm operates in the presence of frenzy that made it heavier, not louder. Heavier, the weight of something that does not need to rush because it already knows where it is going and is confident it will arrive. He reminded the room that truth does not disappear because a powerful man calls it inconvenient, that facts are not eliminated by volume, that accountability is not persecution, that the difference between a question and an attack is not determined by how uncomfortable the question makes the person being asked. That was only the beginning, because then Barack Obama shifted the focus away from Donald Trump's anger, away from the back and forth of the exchange itself, from the political dimension that could be framed as partisan and dismissed as motivated. He shifted the focus to the people watching at home. Parents, grandparents, veterans who served this country and came home and kept serving in the ways that do not make the news, retirees who have been watching American democracy for 50 years and know what it looks like when it is working and what it looks like when it is not. Teachers who spend their days trying to explain to people what the standards of public life are supposed to be. Families who still believe with the particular tested, sometimes exhausted, unextinguished belief of people who have watched a lot of history that public life should mean something, that the people who hold power should behave in a way that justifies being trusted with it. He asked in effect, what message is sent when leaders treat transparency as optional? What does it teach children when adults with power refuse accountability? What does it say about leadership, about the concept of leadership, the thing we tell young people they should aspire to when every challenge becomes a personal attack instead of a chance to clear the air? For older Americans, watching that question did not arrive as rhetoric. It arrived as recognition. They have watched presidents face wars, scandals, recessions, national grief of the kind that does not resolve quickly or cleanly. They have watched leaders navigate crises, the kind where the decisions made in closed rooms have consequences felt in living rooms across the country. They know from the accumulated experience of watching closely for a long time the difference between a leader who has studied the country and a performer who inflames the room. They know what it looks like when someone is doing the job. They know what it looks like when someone is performing the job. Those two things are not the same. The gap between them becomes visible under pressure. Barack Obama's strength in that moment was that he spoke to that memory, that accumulated experience-built, time-tested knowledge of what the job requires and what it looks like when those requirements are being met. He did not need to make Donald Trump look small with insults. He did not need to manufacture a confrontation. He let Donald Trump's defensiveness do that work. Here is where the trap completed itself. The sharper Barack Obama became, the more precise, the more direct, the clearly he held the standard, the more trapped Donald Trump looked. Because every available response made the situation worse. If Donald Trump kept attacking, he confirmed the picture of a man who avoids the issue by destroying the person asking about it. If he softened, he risked looking cornered, and looking cornered means the question had reached real. If he changed the subject, the reporters would notice, the audience would notice, and the act of changing the subject would itself become the story. If he repeated the witch hunt framing, he proved that his only available response to accountability is to declare the accountability illegitimate, which is itself the most complete possible answer to the original question. Barack Obama had moved the conversation into a place where volume no longer helped, where speed no longer helped, where the familiar tools, the redirect, the attack, the grievance, the enormous energy of performed outrage had no purchase because the question was still there waiting, patient, simple. That is the danger of a placed question. It removes the fog. By the end, the story was no longer about one disputed claim. It was not one tense exchange or one uncomfortable press conference moment. It was about something that the exchange had made visible in a way that all the previous coverage had only implied. The habit, the pattern, the repeated, documented, publicly observable habit of turning scrutiny into spectacle, of treating accountability as attack, of reaching for outrage the moment facts demand patience, of declaring the question illegitimate so the answer never has to be given. Barack Obama exposed that habit not by accusing, by demonstrating, by holding the standard steady enough that the gap between the standard and the behavior became impossible to ignore. That was the blow. Not a scandalous secret, not a leaked file or a hidden document or a revelation that changed what was known. Just a public pattern, one that had been running in sight for years, finally stated clearly in a room with cameras in language simple enough that everyone watching could understand what they were looking at. As the press conference moved on, Donald Trump still had the microphone. He still had the platform. He still had the energy and the familiar rhythms and the practiced language of a man who had spent decades making rooms bend to his presence. Barack Obama had changed the frame. The room was no longer asking whether Donald Trump could dominate the moment. It was asking why domination was always his answer. Why, when clarity was available, he chose noise. Why, when accountability was offered, he chose attack. Why, when a simple, direct, reasonable question was asked, the response was never simple or direct or reasonable. Once that question entered the room, it did not leave. It stayed in the air, in the silence between the statements, in the way reporters' questions shifted after that moment, in the way the audience's understanding of the exchange accumulated into something that outlasted the press conference itself. Because here is what Barack Obama understood and what the moment proved about the kind of power that comes not from volume or dominance or the performance of invincibility, but from the willingness to ask for accountability, clearly stand behind the request without flinching, and let the other person's response do the rest of the work. Donald Trump wanted the room to watch him dominate. Barack Obama wanted the room to watch Donald Trump respond to one question. One approach needed the crowd's cooperation to succeed. The other needed honesty, and in a room with cameras and reporters and the full, unedited, unmanaged record, honesty has a structural advantage. It does not need to maintain anything. It does not need to be defended. It does not need to be louder time because this time was not loud enough. It just needs to be stated once and then let the response speak. Donald Trump still had the microphone. Barack Obama had changed the question, and the question, the real question, the one that every public servant should be willing to answer when the country is watching, did not go away just because the man it was addressed to spent the rest of the press conference trying to bury it. The country was still watching closely in time. What it saw is exactly what Barack Obama intended it to see. Not an attack, not a performance, not a game of dominance played for applause, a standard held steady in the presence of a man who has spent his career avoiding that. That is why the exchange lingered. That is why it stayed past the news cycle and the commentary and the spin, because Barack Obama did not need an accusation, he did not need a secret, he did not need anything except the one thing that every person in life eventually has to face, whether on their terms or on someone else's. The moment the country decides it wants clarity in the person, in power decides they would not. That gap, that visible, impossible to close gap, is what the whole world saw, and once it was seen, it could not be unseen.